guys, my name is Trinity, and if you are here, you must be here to talk about books, and today I'm doing it. I'm finally doing it. You guys are about to see my top 10 favorite fantasy series of all time. Now, let's start with a little bit of a precursor disclaimer, if you will. I have been reading fantasy for about 7 years, not quite 10 years. And I started the genre in urban fantasy. I was not the biggest fan of fantasy again until about 5 years ago. And so when I started reading, I was picking up everything and reading the first book and then moving on to the next thing. So these are going to be series that I have completed. And there's only one that I've read the first book and only the second book is out. So I've read half of it. But I love it so much that I'm going to go ahead and talk about it anyway. And that would be Voice of War by Zach Argyle. I have talked about in the past how much I love deliberate description, how much I love plot, and how much I really like it when an author can do plot and character equally well, and Zach Argyle does. So this is no surprise that Voice of War would come into my favorite series of all time because it's everything I want in a fantasy novel. We also not only have great characterization, we have great writing, we have great world building. The plot moves. There are parents in this fantasy novel. There are never parents in fantasy novels. And so that was another thing that I found really great. And Zach does a really great job of tying the familiar and into a story to make it his own. And I say that because there are elements of Mistborn in it. There are elements of Thread Witches and, things like that that I've read before, but Zach took it, ran with it, made it his own, and I adored it so much. I highly recommend Voice of War to anyone who hasn't read it yet. Obviously, this is my top 10 fantasy series, and he has broke through that ceiling of coming in at number 10, and I'm hoping the second book is just as good and elevates this series into like the stratosphere of my favorites of all time. At number 9, we have Blackwing by Ed McDonald. Now, this is a series that I read just as my blog was taking off. Got it from NetGalley, and I have never found them at a bookstore, so I don't own them. I'm going to have to break down and purchase them from the UK, but I need them in my life. Ed McDonald writes grimdark, and I really, really like grimdark. It is a genre that I feel is a little oversaturated right now, but I also feel like there's not enough. So I live on both sides of that thought process. But this one, I think, was probably the best grimdark I've read. Ed McDonald creates a world that you can visualize. The Misery is a place that you can see around you, and the atmosphere he creates in writing The Misery is just heart-pounding. Like, you'd get nervous because of the way he describes things and the way he's able to have you visualize this setting. Also, I'm a huge fan of anti-heroes, and we have a very great anti-hero as our main character. The magic system is really, really interesting. And I think that this is a very slept on series. I really think that there are too many people not picking up Ed McDonald. And if you guys watched my previous video talking about what my channel is all about, this is why I'm here, to introduce you guys to these things. But Blackwing is such a good series. It is a very plot-driven series. That's what I like. So if you guys are looking for a series that does great characterization alongside plot, Blackwing by Ed McDonald is definitely one of those. Coming in at number 8, we have the Split World series by Emma Newman. You guys know that I am a huge, huge fan of Fae stories. This is Fae, and this is told via the 3 realms. So we have the mundane world, we have the Fae world, and then we have an in-between world. And the in-between is where there are humans who live these extended lives because they are pretty much slaves to the Fae. They call them their patrons or whatever, but they are not that. They control everything, the Fae do. But there's magic in the in-between world, and it's really interesting. Part of the reason that I like this is because the main character in this book is living a very Victorian lifestyle in the in-between world. They've never escaped from that way of thinking, and when she escapes, she's like, bye guys, I'm going to the mundane world, I'm going to go to university, and I'm putting all of this behind me. I'm going to live a typical young adult life. And she goes to college. She finds love only to be summoned back to her world in a not so pleasant way. So it's very, very good. I really enjoy Emma Newman's writing. These are pretty short, but this does read like an urban fantasy because we go from the mundane world into these split worlds quite often. And you do get to see all 3 worlds, which is one thing that I really, really love about this series, because how often do you get split worlds where you get all 3 of the worlds instead of just being told about one of the worlds? Coming in at number 7, we are going to harken back to my urban fantasy days, and when that's all I would read. Kelly Armstrong's Bitten. Now, this is a very, very lengthy series. However, if you can see, it says Women of the Other World. These series this series doesn't always follow the same characters. So in Bitten, we are following a werewolf named Elena. Ignore the cover. I don't know why there is a naked chick on the cover, but there is. Probably because we do a lot of shifting, but there is romance in these books. And I like them because they give different perspectives. Like I said, they're not always from the same character's POV. We have Elena here. This is the book that the TV series was based on, and I adore them. They are very plot-driven, very romance-heavy, like I said, but I enjoy Kelly Armstrong's writing quite a bit. These are books that, if you need something between all of your epic fantasies, if you need something fun, if you need something exciting and entertaining, this is that series. They are not great literature by any stretch of the mind. Like, they are just fun, exciting thrill rides. And I highly, highly recommend this series if that's what you're looking for. Coming in at number 6 is going to be a series that you guys have probably seen on my channel before. As you guys know, I am a huge fan of retellings. This means I read a lot of Alice in Wonderland retellings. I read a lot of Camelot retellings. There's one right up there. I read a lot of books based on other books that I've loved in the past. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If it turns out to be a favorite series for you, great. Because if you loved the original and you love the retellings, what's the problem with that? So coming in at number 6, we have Hood by Stephen R. Lawhead. This is a Robin Hood retelling. Now, this is told in a historical fantasy lens, and I really, really enjoyed it. Again, we're talking about someone who can take great plot and great character, blend them together in one novel. Those are the gems that are super, super hard to find. Now, this is a book that moves at a slower pace than probably most of the rest on this list, but I really enjoyed delving into the history, and I really loved the Robin Hood retelling. The way that this was focused in on the actual events that are occurring during the time period as opposed to Robin Hood himself. But it was very, very interesting to see Robin Hood told in a historical lens, and very interesting to see how the story played out, how it started. And yeah, I just love this series so much. And I've recommended it quite a few times on BookTube, on Twitter, and I'll continue to recommend this one because, like I said, Robin Hood told in a historical lens and given fantasy elements to survive the ride. It's so good. I love it. Now, the rest of this list is not going to surprise anyone who's followed me for any amount of time. However, this is the first time this has broken into the top 10 on a list of mine. Coming in at number 5, we have The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne. Yes, I just finished Wrath in the last month or so. Guys, so this book, Malice in particular, does some things that I don't always like in fantasy. We have a very large cast of characters. We have shifting of POVs all over the place. And we have a not quite so plot-driven story. But John Gwynne's writing is very good. He is able to take a lot of the fantasy tropes that we know and love and make them his own, use them in a way that will surprise you. And Malice, I think, is the weakest of the entire series, but it's still really, really good. And I'm not a character-driven reader. This is pretty character-heavy. And I can't say that it's character-driven because we switch POVs quite a bit, but you do get to know the characters that are in The Faithful and the Fallen. You do get to fall in love with them. There is an animal companion that everybody seems to love, and there is no reason not to love the animal companion in this book. But I just think that the way this whole series unfolds is quite genius. It is very interesting to see fantasy tropes turned on their head and utilized in ways that you might not think they're going to be utilized. So I cried reading Ruin and reading Wrath. I didn't like Valor as much as I liked Malice, even though I said this one is the weakest of the series. But Valor had some tropes in it that irked me a little bit. And I was just like, oh, why'd you do that? But as a whole, The Faithful and the Fallen is a wonderful, wonderful series. I highly recommend it. All right, and if anybody is shocked to find this at number 4, I apologize, but I don't know what to tell you. We have Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I don't think I need to tell you what this is about, because Brandon Sanderson, Mistborn, is all over BookTube. However, I would like to say I love political intrigue. This series is full of political intrigue. This series has a plot that moves. Even though it is moved by political intrigue through majority of the series, I enjoy that. I really, really enjoy that. A lot of people don't like that this has a religious ending, so I do want to warn you guys that this has a religious ending. A lot of people are thrown by the massive amount of political intrigue in this book. It's something that I adore, so I really, really enjoy Mistborn, and I understand why it is so well loved. That's all I can say about that. Coming in at number 3 is a series I don't even want to talk about because give me book 3 already. But I cannot make a favorites list without adding this to the list because it is so good. It is so good. I am one of the few people that I know who really just loves Kavoth. I know that he is an unlikable character. I know he's stuck on himself. I know that he is one of those POVs that you just go, why am I reading from this guy's perspective? But The Name of the Wind is probably one of the most beautifully written books I've ever read. And I really like the school setting here. I really like Kavoth's journey. And I really like when we are set up from Bloodsong does this too. An older perspective of the main character talking about their past. I really like that, and I don't know why. It is a trope that I enjoy, and I think whenever we are given that type of perspective, you don't know if what's being told to you is accurate or if it is just that person's perspective of the events. And unreliable narrators, I think it's cool. I like it. And so The Name of the Wind will probably stay in my top favorites. Of course, this is not finished. I said that these books were going to be finished series, but I've read everything that's out. That's all I can say. The next two are not going to surprise anyone because you guys see them in my videos all the time. Coming in at number 2, we have Lightbringer by Brent Weeks. This is another that falls into the same trope cycle as Mistborn. We have a very, very religious ending to the series. So if that puts you off, then there's your warning. But the characters in this series are so fun to follow. So fun to follow. And this is one of those books where there are a lot of characters you can love to hate. And I think that drives me in this series even more so than the plot. These are heavily plot-driven books. But I think the love to hate of Andros Guile is one of the things that pushes me to keep reading. The love to hate situation that Gavin Guile finds himself in. So many things I love to hate about it, but I still love it. And we have some immature characters in here. Kip is very young. That does come across on page. And I think that Brent Weeks kind of gets a bad rap for writing him in a very believable way because they say that the writing's immature. Well, Kip's immature. So I think he did a great job in presenting Kip as a character. And then we have a few female characters that I actually really enjoyed, but there are some that get the shaft. And a lot of people are like, Brent Week's writing is sexist. No, it's not. It's not sexist at all. These things are presented across the board in the way people think in this world. So it's not directed at females, but there's a lot of it going both ways. So sexist is not the correct word for that. So I don't get where that comes from. Anyway, that's a rant for another day. But I really, really enjoy this series so much. You guys have heard me rant about the Blood Mirror and how I didn't like the turn that took, but I did like the way it ended. So very, 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 very much do I recommend Brent Weeks. Do I even need to show you guys what my favorite series of all time is? Are you going to tell me that you don't know? Because there it is. The Waking Fire by Anthony Ryan. This is very much Pirates of the Caribbean meets Indiana Jones, and I love it. I have equated the magic system to being like Mistborn, except instead of metals, we are using dragon's blood. This novel, though, or this series, does have some Deus Ex Machina in it, and I don't mind it. I really don't mind it. It's not a trope that bothers me, but I've heard a couple people mention it lately, and I did want to point out that yes, that does happen. I don't see them as plot conveniences because of the way that they're written. They don't come from nowhere. And I think that you have to read the whole series to realize they don't come from nowhere. This is what was supposed to happen. But I get it if you get into the Legion of Flame and think that there is some Deus Ex Machina in it and don't want to continue. No, I really don't understand. I don't understand. This is the best series I've ever read. So I can say that all day and say I understand. I don't. I don't get it. But yes, this will always be my favorite series, I do believe. And one thing I want to point out, I've talked a couple of times in this video about character work versus plot, and the very rare find it is to find an author that can do both equally well. Anthony Ryan can. All right, that is it for this video. Like, subscribe, do all the fun things, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!